Hi, friends. We remember when we last read from chapter 4 in Gooney Bird is So Absurd. We heard that the children were beginning to explore a type of poem called a limerick. And we remember that a limerick can be a funny poem, silly poem, but it has a particular pattern. And there are two rhyming lines, and then there are two other rhyming lines, and then the last line rhymes with the first two. So it's two, two, and one, kind of like if you think about your pattern, an A-B pattern, A, B, B, A. So we're going to continue reading to see if we can get some inspiration from Mrs. Pidgeon's class for exploring, understanding, appreciating this type of poem, and in order to write our own limerick. Let's begin. We'll begin where we left off with the limerick that the class wrote about Mrs. Pidgeon. There once was a teacher named Pat who gave up the chair where she sat. She tried to write verse, but it only got worse till she warmed up her brain with her hat. The class applauded. You may borrow my hat, Mrs. Pidgeon, Gooney Bird said, any time you want, or you can make your own, of course. Of course, Mrs. Pidgeon said. Next. How about each of you try using your own name in a first line? No need to write an entire limerick. Let's start with first lines. I'll walk around the class in case anyone needs help. She looked at the principal. Usually his visits to classrooms lasted only a few minutes, but Mr. Leroy had picked up a paper and pencil and did not look as if he were planning to leave. For a few moments the class was quiet, with heads bent over, pencils moving on papers. Then, here and there, groaning started. Nothing rhymes with my name, Malcolm groaned. Nothing. Perhaps that's the way you're feeling, a little frustrated. If at first you come up with something and can't think of something that rhymes with it, maybe you're feeling a little challenged, a little frustrated, maybe like moaning and groaning. But don't worry, don't fret. We're going to continue seeing how we can work through this challenge and feel inspired and successful at writing our own limericks. So Malcolm said, nothing rhymes with his name, nothing. Gooney Bird leaned over from her desk and whispered a suggestion. A boy who has triplets at home, she suggested. That's a good first line, and it tells about you. It doesn't have to use your name, she said. How about me? Keiko wailed. Mrs. Pidgeon was headed to Keiko's desk when Gooney Bird spoke again. I have an idea for Keiko, Mrs. Pidgeon. How about a young girl from Asian descent? Lots of things rhyme with descent. So you see, if you're going to write a limerick about yourself, it doesn't have to, the first line does not have to end with your name. If your first name doesn't rhyme with anything, maybe you want to switch it around, put your name in the middle somewhere, or maybe not even use your name, like a boy who had triplets at home. We know that's Malcolm, but he didn't have to say his name. And Kaiko, a young girl of Asian descent. Be creative. Maybe you could put on a thinking hat to warm up your brain for a while and think about what could you say about yourself with a good rhyming word at the end. Let's see how we can be inspired further. One by one, the children created their first lines. Mrs. Pidgeon wrote every one neatly on the board. Then the class added second rhyming lines. Some were quite easy, others were very, very hard. A boy who had triplets at home sometimes needed a brush and a comb. A young girl of Asian descent decided to live in a tent. So we're seeing that pattern that the last word in the first line has to rhyme with the last word in the second rhyme. In the second line, home, comb. Descent, tent. A redhead named Gooney Bird Green wore a hat that was hardly routine. So Gooney Bird used her last name because green rhymes with a lot more things than Gooney. There once was a dude named Tyrone who frequently talked on the phone. There, Tyrone used his name for the last word because it rhymed with other things he wanted to write. Chelsea didn't use her name last, but she used it, and she used a different word for something that she does. A young girl named Chelsea explained that she liked to be out when it rained. Mr. Leroy, Gooney Bird said when she noticed that the principal was still working. His tongue was wedged between his teeth. Time to put your pencil down. I'm not done, Mr. Leroy said. Gooney Bird looked at Mrs. Pidgeon and raised her eyebrows as if she were asking a silent question. Mrs. Pidgeon shrugged. Let him continue on his own, she whispered. Together, the class worked on the limericks they had begun, while Mr. Leroy, his head bent over his paper, wrote and erased, wrote and erased. Sometimes he sighed and stared out the window. It seems as if the children are not the only ones that are feeling a little challenged. We remember when we were writing poetry, and if there's a particular type of poem that has a set of rules, sometimes we need to edit. We need to write something, go back and think about the rule, maybe change the words, and keep working it through until it sounds just right for us. Seems like that's what Mr. Leroy is doing, huh? He's doing his editing process. He's beginning with a rough draft and then refining, revising, rewriting it till it sounds just right. Sometimes he sighed and stared out the window. He's thinking, Kaiko pointed out. Yes, said Gooney Bird. Occasionally it helps to look at the sky and make your mind go blank for a minute. Why don't we all try it because we're sort of stuck on Tyrone's limerick? The entire class, including Mrs. Pidgeon, but not Mr. Leroy, he was bent over his paper again, stared through the window at the sky. My mind never goes blank, Malcolm groaned. My thoughts just keep whirling and whirling. Shh, said Gooney Bird. Silence helps. Gradually, with breaks for staring at the sky, the class began to finish the limericks on the board. Some were very funny and made them laugh aloud. Mr. Leroy never looked up. We're going to stop for there today, and we're going to each begin writing our own limerick. I just want you to think about how you could use that first line to write a limerick about yourself. Just like the children in Miss Pidgeon's class, it does not have to, the first line does not have to end with your name. Maybe just something about you. But you're going to write 2 rhyming lines to begin your limerick about yourself. And remember, limericks are funny and silly. They may be true and may just be silly and funny. Have fun.